I'm going to walk you through how I would start mentor sentences the very first week of school. Yes, the very first week of school. I do not teach any kind of parts of speech or any kind of grammar lessons prior to starting. We jump right into the routine because, as many of you have heard me say before, as I teach through mentor sentences, they absorb all of that grammar conventions, all those mechanics that they really struggle with. They're absorbing all of those parts of speech terms through my lessons because grammar in isolation just doesn't work. If you've joined my webinar, you've probably heard me say that in 1936, the NCTE did a study and found that grammar in isolation had little to no effect on student writing. It doesn't work. So we need to move away from that. We need to stop teaching grammar in isolation. So that's one question that I always get. Well, they don't know the parts of speech before you start, so how can you expect them to do this? Well, I don't expect them to do everything at first. My second grade teachers and my third grade teachers and even possibly my fourth grade teachers, what we're going to do today, I'm going to kind of walk you through and explain, this is what I definitely would do. This is where, depending on your students, they may or may not know, and that's okay. Really, in the beginning, all you're wanting to do is establish the routine. Once the routine is set up and you've started walking through step by step every day, they're going to be able to pick up all of those parts of speech that you're saying that they don't know, because you're going to see them every single week in every single sentence, okay? So when I start, especially with students who've never done mentor sentences before, the first thing you want to do, of course, is to actually introduce them to the concept. So I'm going to kind of switch into teacher mode, and I'll kind of flip back and forth because I'll play teacher, but then I'll kind of talk to y'all too about what's going through my head or things that I would or wouldn't do. But you're going to kind of hear me talk like as if I'm talking to a class. So I would start off just by saying, class, this week or today, however you want to start it, we are going to start our mentor sentence routine. Mentor sentences is a way for us to look at awesome sentences from authors that we love and figure out what makes those sentences so great that we could actually incorporate into our own writing, that we can use in our own writing. So we've read Do Unto Otters today or yesterday or whenever you start, whenever you decide to start, and talked about using that book. We talked about good manners and we talked about the golden rule. But today we're going to pull this one sentence. I've pulled one sentence from the book, and we're going to talk about what makes this sentence so awesome. So at this point, talking to y'all again, not students, I would have the kids sitting on the floor in front of me. They would not have their notebook yet. First week of school, we're just going to walk through the routine. If you want them to have their notebook, by all means do. You have everything in the lesson. If you have my mentor sentences, you have everything you need to start in the notebook if you want that very first week. For me personally, I just want them, especially if they've never done it before, I really want them to be able to see what I'm expecting from them more than worrying about copying everything down, which we know that first week of school, it's like they forget how to even use a pencil. So we definitely want to focus more on looking at the sentence and them understanding what I want from them. My other dog was peeking in to see what was going on. So they'd be sitting on the floor in front of me, and we would just have a discussion. So the first thing I would ask them is, what do you notice about this sentence? What do you see in this sentence that you think is really great or is really awesome or is really unique? Or what do you see in this sentence that makes it so good? Which actually I should back up. See, sorry. Without having kids in front of me, I'm losing my brain already. We would actually read the sentence together first, so I apologize. So we would read the sentence. It's always good to have a considerate neighbor. Now, what do you notice about that sentence that makes that sentence so great? Now, if they've never done mentor sentences, most of them are going to look at you like, what in the world are you talking about? What does that mean? Because they're used to you asking them, what's wrong with this sentence? So a lot of them aren't really going to be familiar with how to answer that question. So you're probably going to have to do a lot of prompting. And that's where, if you've ever watched any of my lower grades videos, the upper grade video that I have, that's actually the 3rd week of school. So we've done it a couple weeks. So all the questioning that you see, they're pretty used to at that point. But if you've ever watched my 2nd grade video or my lower grade, my K1 video, it's actually in kindergarten, both of those were not my classes and they had not done mentor sentences before. So even if you're teaching upper grades right now, which I know most of you are if you're watching this video, you may even want to just go take a peek at how I introduce that sentence the very first time, because you'll see kind of what the kids are kind of feeling out to answer. And then you'll see my prompts to kind of get them going. So, obviously without students here reacting to my questions, it's a little hard to anticipate what they might say, but you can actually see what real students say in those videos. Even if you teach upper grades, go watch this, especially I would say especially the 2nd grade one, that's the middle one, because the kindergarten one, they're really noticing like what letter that they see that they recognize. So that middle one's really good. They start seeing there's a capital. They got really interested in the fact that the title was underlined, and they got really hung up on that. So you can talk about that the first week of school, and then just remind them that yes, this is the title and it is underlined, but what we really want to look at is the actual sentence. So you'll always have 1 or 2 students who are kind of your outgoing students who feel comfortable enough to say something. So my 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade friends especially, the first week of school, even through I'd say the 3rd or 4th week of school, I'd go ahead and take, if they say that there's a capital at the beginning and a period at the end, because at least they're giving you something. But we want to move them away from that, because we want them to know that all sentences have that, and that's not something special or unique. We want them to start looking for things that make that sentence really unique from other sentences that they're writing or that they're seeing in their reading. So some things that they might see here, and I would just jot them down as they call them out to me. So I'm just going to start over here. You can start under the sentence. It's your style. It's your classroom. So you do what fits you and what suits you. So as they're talking to me, I'm just going to write down what they say. And I don't actually put on the chart every time notice and parts of speech. I don't label this, but I'm doing it just for you, for the purpose so you'll know what I'm doing. So they might say that it starts with a capital, and we might have a quick little conversation. Yeah, that's great. And all sentences should start with a capital, right? Yes. Okay. So what else do you see? What else do you notice? So they might say, well, it ends with a period, because if somebody says capital, somebody else is going to say period, right? So that's going to be the great time to say, you're right, it does end with a period. So tell me what kind of sentence that is if it ends with a period. It's a what kind of sentence? And so hopefully my 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade friends, they'll at least be able to tell you that it's a telling sentence, if not a declarative sentence. We'll keep going. What else do you notice? What else do you see in this sentence? Are there any words that you see that are different or unusual? Kind of prompting them, right? So hopefully they might say that word considerate is a big word, and it's a word that some of them may not even be familiar with. So since you have already read the book and you've already talked about the book and talked about good manners, hopefully you talked about what that word considerate means. So if somebody brings that up, you can say, well, what does that mean, considerate? What does it mean to be considerate? And have a conversation about that and say, so if you're a considerate neighbor, what is that word considerate doing? It's describing. So hopefully somebody will say that, and if not, if you hear crickets, we can go ahead and tell them, because that's going to be our focus of the week. It's describing what kind of neighbor that it's good to have. So there are describing words. Does anybody know what those are called? Describing words that describe nouns. Hopefully somebody will in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And they'll say adjectives. So there are describing words or adjectives, and I'm totally looking back at my cheat sheet to make sure that I have everything, which is exactly why I create this lesson for you. So I just have it taped up back here. So another thing that they'll probably notice is the contraction it's, or they may at least say that there's an apostrophe. They'll notice something about that word. And really and truly, if you're like, I don't know, my kids might not, I'm telling you, start it. You're going to be surprised when you let them just kind of tell you what they see. Stuff's going to start flying out of their mouth. The video I'm telling you to watch of 2nd grade is actually in a 1st grade classroom. And those kids, I mean, that was like one of the longest parts of the lesson, was them telling me what they saw in the sentence that made it a good sentence. So you just keep asking them, what makes it a good sentence? What makes it a good sentence? And talking about how, you know, we're looking at what we can do in our own writing to make sure that when we write good sentences, they look just like this one. So it kind of starts getting them thinking, you know, noticing and observing, and they'll start looking at all sentences too, not just the mentor sentence. So they may talk about the contraction. Say, well, if it's a contraction, what 2 words make that contraction? It is. Very good. So, and you just continue with that conversation. Depending on grade level, so 3rd, 4th, and 5th, I would definitely go ahead and make sure they understand that this is a simple sentence. Whether you do it today or whether you do it on day 2, where you're talking about parts of speech, you're looking for subjects and predicates, you really want to make sure that they understand that this is a simple sentence, because that's kind of laying that foundation to get them to where they need to be for the future when we start talking about compound and complex sentences. So yes, this is a simple sentence because, and this one's kind of tricky, actually, since it's the first week of school, it's probably pretty good that you're walking them through this one to identify the subject and predicate, because it's the contraction. So you definitely want to make sure you talk about that contraction first, because that is the subject and predicate. It's a simple sentence with it is our subject and is our predicate. And let's see, let me think if there's anything else we want to talk about. You may want to talk about always being an adverb. Like if you're a 5th grade teacher, they probably are ready to talk about that. Maybe not the first week of school though. It's just really up to you. But we talked about how it had describing words. So if you wanted to add, it has adjectives and adverbs, you could. But our focus for the week is going to be adjectives. So at this point, and I know it's still, I'm walking you through it, but it's still really difficult because I don't have kids reacting to me. So I apologize. But at this point, this is it for day 1. So we would stop and I would say, that's great. So we notice all these good things about this sentence. So we definitely want to make sure that when we're writing our own sentences, we have capital at the beginning and punctuation at the end. If it's a declarative sentence, we have a period. And to make our writing more interesting and more entertaining, we want to make sure that we use describing words or adjectives. So we're going to talk more about that this week, looking at this sentence. So done, the end. Okay, if you're doing it before your writing workshop time, you can lead into, if you wanted to do an activity. Actually, in my Better Than Basil for doing to otters, there's an activity where they're identifying character traits, which goes right along with adjectives, because that's what character traits are. So you could kind of extend that if you wanted to into your writing time, where they were describing somebody or whatever. But you definitely want to stop on, as far as mentor sentence time, stop after day 1, because remember, you want to do everything in small manageable chunks. So the second day, day 2, we'll come back together. They're going to be on the floor with me, and we're going to talk about parts of speech, which I know is the killer first week of school. So for this one, They're really probably only going to label a couple things, and that's okay. We don't need them to label every single word, especially at the beginning of the school year. There's no point in it because all they're going to be doing is guessing at what words they are. So day 2, they'd be on the floor with me again, and we'd say, all right, we're going to read this sentence again. Read it with me. It's always good to have a considerate neighbor. And yesterday we talked about what made this sentence such a great sentence. Today we're going to look at the actual words that are in the sentence and talk about how those parts of speech work together. So do you see any words in this sentence that you know what part of speech it is? And part of speech, remember, that's like nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, those types of things. So do you see any words that you know? And at this point, hopefully I'd be getting some hands raised, and you can either label right on here, which is what I do because they're sitting on the floor, they can see, or if you want, you can rewrite the whole sentence. In their notebook, I have them rewrite their sentence, skipping lines, which remember, first week they don't have their notebook, but when it's actually time you're doing the routine, I have them rewrite the sentence, skipping lines in between, and labeling the parts of speech that they know. And that's the key, that they know. I don't want them guessing. So if they come to the floor and they only have 2 words labeled, that's what they say they know. But as they sit on the floor and we talk about it, they should be labeling with me. So if they have something wrong, they should fix it. If they missed a word, if they didn't get a word and we talk about it, then they need to label it. So because we're just modeling right now and I'm showing them the routine, I'm not going to rewrite the sentence. We're just going to have a discussion. So hopefully probably the first thing they're going to see is neighbor is a noun. You are so right. Neighbor is a noun, because how do we know that? And remember, that's the key with the parts of speech day, is not just for the sake of labeling. You want them to have that authentic discussion. Just like on day 1, all of the learning comes through the discussion that's happening with the students. So same with day 2. We want to have discussion, not just, great, you knew that was a noun, let's label it and move on. How do you know that's a noun? And of course, some of our older kids are like, seriously, we've been doing nouns since 1st grade. But some of them don't know. So we know it's a noun because neighbor is a person, or in this case, an animal. And that's a noun. Great job. Okay, so what else do we see? Well, we talked yesterday, hopefully somebody will say, that there were adjectives, and we said considerate was an adjective. Great job. So let's label considerate as an adjective, and I just write ADJ for adjective because it's such a long word. And that's very good. You said it was describing, and so what is it describing? Considerate is describing what? The neighbor. Very good. So a considerate neighbor. The adjective describes the noun. Considerate is describing the neighbor. Great job. Is there anything else that you see that we could label? I'm going to look at my cheat sheet one more time and just think while they're thinking. So hopefully they'll see good is also an adjective. Most of them will know that good is an adjective. So we can label good as an adjective, and good is describing its, which is a little tricky, or it. So if they know that the contraction is made of it is, they might also be able to tell you that it is a pronoun. Okay, and so honestly at this point I would just stop. If some of them are trying to tell you other words, you can talk about them. But at this point, because the focus is adjectives and we have our adjectives labeled, I would really just stop. My 5th grade friends, if you really feel like your students should know all of these words, because 4th graders should know all of these words, you could go ahead and move on with them, label them if you feel like they're ready. But again, this is just the introduction lesson. It's supposed to be easy because they're supposed to feel like, oh, this is going to be fine. I can be successful at this. So the reason that I choose such kind of easy sentences for that very first lesson is really because it's the first lesson and we want them to feel successful. So at this point, If you had the interactive notebook companion, this would be a great time to move into that foldable about adjectives and do some practice with adjectives, because that's what our focus is. If you don't, then I would do something, because that's our focus skill, just to kind of reinforce that practice of adjectives and what adjectives are. All right, so then again, we're moving on. Now we're in day 3. So this was day 2 where we labeled. So day 2, once you actually get into the routine, remember we can also focus on subjects and predicates. I circle my subjects and underline my predicates. So you could circle it and underline the S for its. And then let's see, making sure I didn't forget anything. We're good. All right, so moving on to Wednesday. Now this is where it's really important, not just the first week, but forever, that you model for your students what they should be doing. So when I am revising this sentence, again, I'm going to show them a model. Now, because the first week of school, you're actually walking through everything with them, I would not have a model already written up here. I would go through my thought process and do a think aloud with them and talk to them about what I'm doing. And what I'm going to show you, second grade friends that are watching, and even first grade friends, when you get into revising, my first grade friends, this is good for you. What I'm going to be doing today is doing some scaffolding with like a close sentence type strategy. So, so that they can see my thought process. First grade and second grade friends, you may actually want to do that every single week, okay? So we're going to read the sentence again. It's always good to have a considerate neighbor. And as we said, some things that we can do to make our sentence better is to add adjectives, which is also the focus this week. So we're going to see what kind of adjectives we can add to this sentence. All right, and I am going to kind of kneel down so that I can write straight, because I'm really bad at that. All my writing always ends up at an angle. So I would actually show them. See, it's already at an angle. All right, some ways that I can add adjectives. If I'm going to add an adjective, it has to be before a noun. Well, I guess it doesn't have to be, but in this case, it needs to be before the noun. So I'm going to see if I can think of another adjective that I can add to go with neighbor. So it's always good, but you could actually change good too, which we can talk about in a second. It's always good to have a blank, considerate neighbor. Okay, so as I'm looking at this sentence and I'm trying to think of another adjective, I want to make sure that it makes sense. I wouldn't want to say it's always good to have a lousy, considerate neighbor. That doesn't fit, right? That doesn't work. So it's always good to have I think I want a synonym for considerate, or something that tells something nice about someone, right? So now I would kind of walk through just like I'm doing. Some of them may start calling out words that I could fill in, and I would totally let them, because they're thinking. So you can even use some of their examples if you want. So my model, or my example that I give you in the lesson, is to use the word friendly. And we want to put a comma because there's two adjectives that are describing neighbors. We want to put a comma to separate. So it's always good to have a friendly, considerate neighbor. So I've just revised this sentence by adding another adjective. Now remember, we don't want to add a bunch of adjectives. Just because we add adjectives doesn't mean it makes it a good revision or a good revised sentence. We want to actually add words that will help our sentence sound better, not just add a bunch of adjectives just to say that we did something, right? So now something else you can do if you want to talk about replacing words, and this again depends on your class, depends on if you feel like they're ready. You could say, you know, another adjective in this word or in this sentence is good. Is there another word we could use instead of good? Because I kind of don't like that word good. Everybody always says good. So what's another word that we could use? And so, you know, they might start calling out again. My example that I give you in the model lesson is it's always lovely to have a friendly, considerate neighbor. Okay, so now the first week of school, you're probably not doing a whole bunch of writing just yet. If you had some kind of writing that they'd been working on, at this point, I would have them actually pull that out and look at how they could add adjectives or revise their writing that they've already been working on to try to improve it, just like we did in our mentor sentence. Now, when you're actually in the routine and they're doing this in their notebook, you will show them an example, and then they will go off and do, you know, it's their turn. They will go off and write their own revised mentor sentence. So as they're writing, I suggest you go around and look to make sure everybody's on the right track and everybody's actually doing something. If you have any reluctant writers, I tell my kiddos that you should be writing. If you don't have anything in your notebook and you say you can't think of anything to write, then you copy what I have on the board, because then at least they have a good model in their notebook. But again, remember, first week, you know, you may or may not want them already doing their notebook. I didn't do the notebook the first week of school just because I wanted them to understand the process more than anything. So this was day 3. Revision. Sorry, it's so sloppy. All right, so now day 4 is going to be the day that we imitate. Now this is always the trickiest, but then it always becomes their favorite. So at first it's tricky because they don't really understand how to take that sentence and keep the structure of it or keep the same style. So you really have to show them how to do that. And another way, just like we did this closed sentence, would be that same type of thing. A closed sentence, almost like, I like to set it up almost like a Mad Lib, where they have to fill in a noun in this blank, an adjective in this blank, which will fit very well here. So let me see my model. Oh, that's right. I suggested in this lesson you could actually have them talk about what kind of classmate they want to have. So they talk about kind of setting the environment or the community of the classroom for the year, what kind of classmate they want to have. So I would write, it's always adjective to have a adjective noun. Okay, oops, I put my period in the wrong place. Okay, so does that make sense? You can see the scaffolding happening there. It's like a Mad Lib. So now, as you get further into the more complex sentences, it's difficult to do this. But by that time, they start understanding how to turn that structure in their mind without actually seeing a sentence with lines. Again, when you're doing this routine every single week, you want to show them a model, which if you have my lessons, I provide you, or you can write your own, but you want to show them a model and talk about what did I do in my sentence that's the same as the mentor sentence. Because that's important for them to identify what I did, so that then they understand what they can do, what I kept the same versus what I changed. Okay, so here we might kind of do a shared writing here where we kind of just talk out loud. Now y'all know I said I don't like that word good. So what's another word I could use there? Maybe it's always nice. It's always nice to have I want to talk about my classmates. I want to talk about what kind of class I want to have. So it's always nice to have a something classmate. What kind of classmate would I want to have? I want somebody who's helpful. So I'm going to say a helpful classmate. And here is where you can have them suggest, well, what kind of classmate would you like? And they can kind of call out to you, or you can call on them. And this would be a great time to have them go ahead and take out their notebook. I know we haven't worked in our notebook all week. Go ahead and take out their notebook and write their own imitation, just so they're getting something down. And again, it's kind of a good reminder of how we want our class to be. So that's something that I would go ahead and have them write. And again, you'd walk around, you'd be looking to see who is on the right track. Oh, you forgot your capital. Make sure you fix that. Or, oh, that's a contraction. We need an apostrophe. Make sure you fix that. And again, reluctant writers can just copy your model. But what you're going to find, revision day and imitation day, they're not going to copy you. Even if you tell them they can, they're not going to, because this is the time for them to be creative. This is the time for them to actually get to try some things out and write about what they want to write about. So they might copy at first, but then when they realize that you're not going to be calling on them because that sentence to share is already on the board, so why would you call on them again? They'll kind of figure out, oh, I need to try my own. I never had kids copy the sentence off the board, even though I told them they could. They might have started, they might get to like, it's always nice to have, and then they get to this point and they go ahead and change it. So just some suggestions for you. On the very last day, day 5, that's the day where you're going to want to do your formative assessment, which is the little quiz. Now, because you've done all of this together as a class, I would actually display that quiz on the smartboard, or your if you have a Ladybug or Mimeo, I would project it and do it together to show them what their quizzes are going to look like. So you can take those for a grade. I definitely wouldn't take the first one for a grade, but you can take those for a grade. But I've been really trying to impress, especially in my webinars, I've been trying to impress upon my followers that those were really created as formative assessments. They can be for grades. I'm not saying never take them for a grade, but they're really meant for you to see who's understanding the skill and who's not. So, you know, if it's the very first week that you've ever taught prepositions and you give them the quiz, you can probably expect that most of them aren't going to do very well because you've only done it for 4 days. So, you know, some of them might do really well, but some of them need more time. So this is really just a way for you to see who might need a little more support in a small group. Now, if it's the 3rd week and, you know, maybe you teach the main skills, prepositions, and then the next week there's prepositions in the sentence, so you talk about them again, and then the next week there's prepositions in the sentence, so you talk about them again, and you pull out another quiz to do prepositions to see what they know. By that time, because they've started kind of getting an idea of what they are, that might be a good time to give them that quiz. But that first week, you know, as teachers, it's not enough time. So depending on the skill. Now with adjectives, I would hope that they would get that in 4th and 5th grade. But you just never know.